Madam President, our history with Israel has been permeated with many invasions in 1978, 1982, and 2006. And all these invasions, all these occupations that resulted in great devastation, the killing of thousands of civilians, they all ended with the defeat and withdrawal of Israel. Today's invasion will have the same result.
On October 1st, Israel announced a limited ground invasion into southern Lebanon. At the outset, Israel officials described the ground invasion as a limited, localized, and targeted with the stated goal of neutralizing the resistance's ability to fire on northern Israel settlements. The aim was to push the resistance back across the Litani River.
So they're describing this as a limited, localized, and targeted ground raids. What does it mean exactly? And limited, but to what extent? Who defines those limits?
Well, like a lot of the IDF's operational objectives, the language is very vague, so it's kind of hard to determine what exactly their goals are. It began early over the past couple days with limited special operations raids to gain intelligence, to engage forward operating posts for Hezbollah, and basically gauge enemy capabilities. Now they're following it up with a combined arms ground force with tanks, infantry, and artillery. If it looks limited, that's a pretty significant force they're sending in there based off of the units they've amassed.
Within days, however, Tel Aviv mobilized 4 additional divisions along the southern border, signaling a clear escalation in its military engagement. By late September, Israel's assassination operations had reportedly decimated much of the resistance's senior leadership, with particular mention of the assassination of Nassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of the resistance.
إذن نال سيد الشهداء الشهادة، نالها دفاعا عن غزة، نالها دفاعا عن فلسطين، نالها دفاعا عن القضية، نالها دفاعا عن بوصلتنا الأولى والأخيرة، نالها سيد الشهداء. التبريكات للتعازي، التبريكات للتعازي باستشهاد الأمين العام لحزب الله السيد حسن نصر الله.
Even so, Reuters and other media outlets reported that the Lebanese resistance group managed to re-establish its command just a few weeks later. In fact, Swedish retired Lieutenant Colonel JACQUES considered the Israeli military strategy of taking out the leadership of Hamas and the resistance to be a fundamentally flawed one, as he said in this insightful clip from a podcast on YouTube.
And we see also, I talked about Nasrallah and all these leaders of the Hezbollah that were killed recently. And that had also some consequence on the Israeli intelligence, because as I explained on on your channel, I think a couple of weeks ago, when you kill the head of a clandestine structure, the problem is that you don't know what happens next. You have no control over what's going on. So we are talking about operations that are mainly PR operations, because on the operational side now, the Israeli intelligence is trying to figure out how Hezbollah has adjusted its command structure. So what looks like a tactical success is in fact an operational failure.
By mid-October, the Israeli military was still struggling to break through the Lebanese border area. Israeli forces had reportedly faced relentless shelling along their supply routes, fell into ambushes, and encountered numerous booby traps.
Hezbollah says its fighters have ambushed a group of Israeli soldiers attempting to infiltrate Lebanese territory, resulting in many casualties.
Anadolu Agency reported that after 3 weeks of ground assaults in southern Lebanon, Israel's three-pronged offensive has, and I quote, not achieved any of its objectives. And it is to the extent that Andreas Craig from the Defense Studies Department at King's College London noted that Israel has not made the progress that he expected them to make in 16 days, which suggests that it is far more difficult than they expected. There is certainly more fierce resistance than Israel's initial expectations, he noted. On October 28th, the Resistance's Operations Room issued a communiqué claiming its forces had confirmed the death of at least 90 Israeli soldiers and officers. The statement also reported that at least 750 had been wounded and that 38 of Israel's renowned Merkava tanks had been destroyed. These figures, the resistance asserted, apply solely to the casualties and losses inflicted on Israeli forces operating within Lebanese territory. On the other hand, Israel has released footage showing its forces demolishing numerous homes on border villages, such as Habib. However, the resistance contends that Israel has not yet been able to capture and hold a single village. The Israeli military justifies the widespread destruction by claiming that it targets the resistance's tunnel infrastructure, while the resistance itself argues that the demolitions aim to prevent ambushes on Israeli soldiers. They claim the losses of the Israeli Defense Forces, which Israel has not fully acknowledged, are seemingly having an effect on its troops. Recently, the Israeli Hebrew outlet Yediot Aharonot reported growing distrust and tension within the elite Eagles Commando Unit, highlighting concerns over poor decision-making in southern Lebanon and raising the question about the effectiveness of Israel's strategy. So today I will undertake the very bold and, might I say, dangerous task of reporting on the Israeli invasion into southern Lebanon. And unlike the Ukraine war, the footage and accurate reports are quite hard to come by. Moreover, Hezbollah is labeled as a terrorist organization in the West, and therefore I will refer to them as the resistance from here on in to avoid any possible censorship. However, in the likely event that this video becomes censored or targeted with limited or no ads, I ask that you donate via a super thanks to assist in my research in the event that you enjoy this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. So according to the Cradle Media Company, following heavy bombardments by the Israeli army, the resistance fighters retreated to defensive positions from which they have been countering Israeli attempts to invade southern Lebanon. The media claims that the images and footage released by the Israeli army allegedly showing soldiers entering Hezbollah facilities near the border are nothing more than wartime propaganda, as these positions, they say, constructed under the watchful eye of Tel Aviv, hold no defensive value and have been bombed countless times without any real strategic impact on the war. The border facilities were previously used by the resistance elite Radwan forces to launch attacks against Israeli positions. The area south of the Litani River hosts thousands of such installations, which are larger, deeper, and far greater strategic importance. The article corroborates my earlier research that despite continuous attempts, the Israeli army has yet to secure a foothold in southern Lebanon. They advance deeper only to face fierce resistance, forcing them to retreat under fire. In fact, it is reported that the maximum depth reached by the Israeli Defense Forces, or the IDF, has been about a mere 2 kilometers in the Al-Quza area, but reports that they were forced to retreat quickly, suffering heavy casualties and losing tanks and bulldozers. The Israeli strategy seems to be to avoid venturing into villages and urban areas, even after systematic destruction, to minimize direct clashes or the risk of falling into the resistance's ambushes. Instead, it prefers to advance along the outskirts of villages, staying away from the resistance fighters' watchful eyes, except in regions where villages merge, such as Maroun al-Ras, Al-Adesa, and Yarun. The resistance's strategy involves deploying ground forces to ambush Israeli troops, with anti-tank units effectively targeting enemy vehicles, both within Lebanon and across the border. These operations are complemented by artillery units that shell Israeli supply lines and group gatherings, which not only complicates rescue missions for the Israeli military, but also prolongs the extraction of the dead and wounded, raising concerns about the safety of civilians caught in the crossfire. And here is some insight as to why the Israeli forces are facing such difficulties in the invasion into South Lebanon. Although the US-backed Israeli forces are well-trained and equipped with some of the world's best military hardware, they struggle with the terrain in southern Lebanon, which favors guerrilla tactics adapted by the resistance fighters. Unlike the IDF, these fighters are natives of the villages where the battles play out. They know the land intimately and use every tree, valley, mountain, and rock to their advantage, defending their home with a resilience that no technology can easily overcome. High terrain provides them with visual and fire control, making it difficult for the Israeli forces to advance. It is also important to note that there is no single strategic village. Rather, control over different areas provides various tactical advantage. And then there is also the issue of the resistance's new weapon capabilities. After weeks of silence, the resistance recently released footage showing an attack on an Israeli unit of 7 soldiers with 2 Almas guided missiles in the village of Ramyeh. The aftermath suggests at least 2 soldiers were killed and several were injured, although Israel has not reported on any casualties, which confirms suspicions that Tel Aviv has been downplaying its losses in southern Lebanon and elsewhere throughout the war. Moreover, the resistance has introduced 4 new weapons into service this month: the Qadir-2 ballistic missile, the NASA-1 and NASA-2 missiles, and the M80 anti-personnel rocket launcher. The Qadir-2 has a range of 250 kilometers with a 405 kilogram warhead, while the NASA-1 and 2 have ranges of 100 and 150 kilometers respectively, with pinpoint accuracy. These additions signal the resistance's advanced capabilities in both targeting and firepower. And lastly, further proof that Israel's invasion into southern Lebanon is not going as well as they would have hoped is evidenced as follows. Earlier this week, Brigadier General Yitzhak Brik criticized the Israeli military's limited progress, revealing that forces have managed to advance only 3 kilometers into Lebanon, well short of the Litani River, which lies about 27 kilometers from the border. Why? Because, he said, the army is tiny. In 1978, the Israeli forces reached the Litani, and in 1982, they reached as far as Beirut. Now it is only 3 kilometers, he stated. Then there is the words of the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, known for making exaggerated claims about military achievements in Gaza. He asserted that Israel destroyed 80% of the resistance's missile stockpile. However, the resistance continues to escalate strikes on a near daily basis, insisting that its stockpile remains largely intact and the ongoing barrage of fire targeting Israeli settlements and troop gatherings suggests that the military has achieved little in the way of degrading the resistance's capabilities. In summary, despite the assurances that the military campaign would drive the resistance back behind the Litani River and facilitate the return of some 60 to 100,000 settlers to their homes in northern Israel, the number of displaced Israelis has continued to grow. The resistance's new Secretary General, Sheikh Nami Qassem, has firmly vowed to persist in the fight for Gaza and Lebanon, signaling a steadfast refusal to bow to Israel's demands.
When I was doing training in my younger years, I was trained in the British intelligence, and that was at the time of the IRA, so the Irish War in Northern Ireland. And I remember perfectly that the British had a very exhaustive list of all the commanders of the Irish Republican Army, which was organized very much like an army with regiments, battalions, and all that. And it was clandestine, of course, but the British had really every kind of detail on these guys, but really everything. They could know which doctor they visit, in which school were the children. They knew everything. And I asked them, why don't you kill them? Since you know the chiefs, so the commanders, you could kill them. And this British intelligence officer told me, no, but we don't do that, because if we kill them, then everything we have done is lost, and the whole structure of the army it then becomes totally unknown from us. And the advantage of knowing the commanders is that we know exactly who are their contacts, how they behave, how they would react to such and such situation, how they would react to negotiation, how they would react to how they behave, and all these aspects are part of the daily assessments that an intelligence organization must make about the enemy. When you kill those people, then you lose all that. Your enemy becomes unpredictable. And that's exactly what's happening in Gaza and in the South Lebanon.